What happens when a seasoned journalist refuses to play by royal rules? Today on Good Morning America, George Stephanopoulos delivers a live, no-holds-barred confrontation that leaves Prince Harry visibly shaken. Watch as decades of public persona unravel in front of millions. This is an interview you cannot afford to miss. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to catch every jaw-dropping celebrity moment. What happens when a seasoned journalist refuses to play by royal rules? Today on Good Morning America, George Stephanopoulos is about to confront Prince Harry live, and the results are shocking. This is not the soft, sympathetic interview that the public expected. Instead, we are about to witness decades of carefully crafted public image unravel in front of millions of viewers. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below to share your thoughts. This story will give you insight into celebrity accountability, high-stakes journalism, and the explosive moments you will not see anywhere else. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss a single jaw-dropping moment from this channel. The Good Morning America studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Cameras were lined up, lighting adjusted to highlight the host and guest at their best angles. Crew members moved quickly behind the scenes, monitors flickered, and producers whispered last-minute instructions. George Stephanopoulos sat across from Prince Harry, calm and professional, reviewing his notes for the upcoming interview. Harry appeared relaxed, wearing his usual media-trained smile, expecting a conversation that would focus on his charitable work and mental health advocacy. He believed this would be another platform to speak on his own terms, to highlight the causes that mattered to him without challenging questions. Promotional materials had promised light discussion, a friendly environment, and a chance to promote his latest projects. Harry did not anticipate what was coming. Stephanopoulos had spent weeks preparing for this interview, reviewing previous statements, public appearances, and media patterns. The contrast between expectation and reality would be the first shock to both the audience and the royal himself. Even now, as cameras rolled and the studio lights glared warmly, Harry could not know that the next 30 minutes would test his composure and expose the contradictions in his narrative. Before the questions even began, the tension in the room was palpable. For viewers at home, this was the calm before the storm, and for those who have been following every royal revelation, this was the moment they had been waiting for. Do not forget to subscribe so you do not miss the rest of this incredible confrontation. What Harry did not know was that George Stephanopoulos had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Every previous interview, every statement, every book excerpt had been carefully reviewed. He knew the patterns, the contradictions, and the moments other journalists had avoided. This was not going to be another friendly conversation about charity work or mental health advocacy. Stephanopoulos had a plan, and it was clear that he intended to hold Prince Harry accountable in ways that few had dared before. The contrast between what Harry expected and what he was about to face could not have been greater. He had prepared his own talking points, ready to speak on issues that mattered to him while avoiding uncomfortable scrutiny. He expected gentle questions and sympathetic nods. Instead, he was met with a journalist armed with facts, contradictions, and a determination to challenge his carefully constructed narrative. Every word from Stephanopoulos would cut directly to the heart of the public image Harry had built over the years. This was more than an interview. It was a test of truth, responsibility, and accountability. Stephanopoulos did not intend to attack personally, but he did intend to make Harry confront the consequences of his actions and statements. The tension in the studio rose as the first questions loomed, signaling the start of a confrontation that would expose gaps, inconsistencies, and unspoken truths. For viewers at home, the stakes were immediate. What they were about to witness was not just a conversation, but a reckoning. The calm, composed prince that had entered the studio moments ago would soon be tested in ways that would leave audiences stunned and compelled to watch every moment unfold. The interview began with a question that immediately caught Harry off guard. Stephanopoulos spoke calmly but with precision, asking how he reconciled his repeated calls for privacy with the dozens of public interviews, documentaries, and books he had participated in. The contrast was stark, and it was clear from the way the question was framed that this would not be an easy conversation. Harry shifted slightly in his chair, his well-practiced media smile flickering for a brief moment. He explained that there was a difference between sharing his truth and having his privacy invaded. Speaking publicly, he said, was always on his terms and focused on issues that mattered to him. Stephanopoulos leaned forward slightly, maintaining a professional tone that carried an unmistakable edge. He asked whether it was really about the issues or if it was about controlling the narrative. From the audience's perspective, it seemed Harry wanted privacy when it suited him and publicity when it benefited him financially. The tension in the room rose immediately. Harry paused, then carefully explained that his actions had been intended to shed light on important causes and to tell the truth about what happened to his family. The host pressed further, pointing out that those actions had consequences for the people he accused and for relationships that could not respond publicly. Harry's composure began to crack as he countered that his family had decades of access to sympathetic coverage and platforms. Stephanopoulos asked whether it was fair that Harry had repeatedly shared his story while his family remained largely silent, highlighting the seeming imbalance between public disclosure and private rights. Harry's jaw tightened, his polite training warring with the growing frustration that had begun to surface. He insisted that the palace and media machinery protected his family while he felt destroyed by lies and misrepresentation. Stephanopoulos responded that millions of viewers were watching and wanted answers that went beyond general statements. The first cracks in the royal facade were visible, and the audience could sense that the confrontation had already begun to unsettle Harry. Every answer was measured but defensive, and every question pushed him further into uncomfortable territory, setting the stage for the escalating tension to come. The conversation took a sharper turn when Stephanopoulos shifted the focus to finances and contractual obligations. He asked Harry about the timing of his book releases, Netflix deals, and other media projects, pointing out that these ventures coincided with sensitive moments in the royal family. From the audience's perspective, it appeared that the questions were designed to highlight potential conflicts between financial gain and family responsibility. Harry straightened in his chair, his composure slightly strained, and explained that these projects were years in the making and that contractual obligations left little room for adjustment. Stephanopoulos pressed further, asking whether those obligations were more important than family relationships. The question struck a nerve. Harry insisted that financial security for his family had been a priority, especially after stepping back from royal duties. He argued that without income from the royal family, he had to provide for his wife and children. Stephanopoulos countered that some support had been available, including contributions from his father and a substantial inheritance from his grandmother. This created an immediate tension between perception and reality, and Harry's frustration became visible. The host questioned how financial independence justified the timing of media releases that coincided with moments of grief and transition in the royal family. Harry defended the choices, saying that canceling years of work was not practical and that these projects were necessary to secure a future for his family. Stephanopoulos highlighted the apparent inconsistency. On one hand, Harry spoke of leaving to protect his family from control, yet he now relied on other powerful institutions like Netflix executives and publishers. The moral tension was clear. Financial security had come at a cost, and the audience could sense the weight of the choices that Harry had made. Every answer was measured but defensive, revealing cracks in the narrative. Stephanopoulos pressed on, framing the issue as a question of loyalty versus independence. Did the pursuit of financial freedom justify the perceived disregard for family sensitivity? The tension in the studio was almost tangible, and viewers could feel the intensity building. The confrontation was no longer just about words or accusations. It was about the consequences of choices and the responsibility that comes with public influence. By the end of this segment, the audience could sense that Harry was beginning to realize that defending financial decisions would require him to justify personal priorities over family loyalty. Stephanopoulos shifted the conversation to Harry's past actions, the moments that had sparked controversy and public criticism. He asked about the Las Vegas party, the infamous costume incident, and the comments Harry had made regarding his military service that offended many veterans. The questions were pointed but measured, designed to highlight choices that were avoidable and to ask why accountability had not been fully embraced. Harry leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped, and took a deep breath. He admitted that those moments were mistakes, moments in his youth when he had been grieving, struggling, and trying to cope with mental health challenges. Each incident, he said, had been regrettable, and he had apologized multiple times. For him, the focus had always been on learning and growing from those experiences. Stephanopoulos pressed on, asking why those mistakes seemed to repeat the narrative of impulsive choices, and whether public figures must take greater care given the platform and influence they hold. The tension in the studio grew, because Harry's responses were defensive yet measured. He explained that at the time he had felt trapped by his role, overwhelmed by expectation and burdened by personal loss. The mistakes, he said, were not reflective of his current self, but of the person he had been under immense pressure and emotional strain. The host framed the issues in terms of personal responsibility, pointing out that grief and stress did not excuse public missteps or the harm caused to others. Every choice, even in youth, had consequences, and as a public figure, Harry's actions affected not only his reputation but the perception of the institution he had been born into. Harry nodded, visibly taking in the point, while asserting that he had tried to learn and make amends wherever possible. The audience could feel the balance between accountability and explanation. Harry's honesty about emotional struggles humanized him, but the host's insistence on personal responsibility reminded viewers that fame did not exempt anyone from scrutiny. The confrontation continued to build, moving from past mistakes to broader questions of consequence and ethics, setting the stage for the next level of tension in the discussion. Stephanopoulos turned the focus to one of the most sensitive and high-profile aspects of Harry's public narrative: his claims of racial bias toward Meghan. He asked Harry to provide concrete examples, specific incidents, names, or dates that could clearly demonstrate the discrimination he had described. The question hung in the air, and the tension in the studio became almost palpable. Harry's hands tightened around the arms of his chair as he searched for a way to respond without breaking the boundaries he had set to protect certain family members. Harry explained that he had refrained from naming individuals out of a desire to shield relatives and avoid escalating conflict. He insisted that the conversations and moments he had referenced were real, and that they had caused genuine pain for his wife. The audience could see the struggle between presenting an emotionally honest perspective and providing verifiable evidence. Stephanopoulos acknowledged that the pain was real and valid, but pressed on, noting that subjective experiences alone were difficult for the public to evaluate and that extraordinary claims deserved specific proof. The host asked whether some of the comments might have been innocent curiosity or ordinary family speculation, something that could happen in any household. He challenged Harry to explain why certain interactions should be classified as racist rather than awkward or uninformed. Harry's face flushed slightly as he stressed that he had witnessed the impact firsthand, and that Meghan's isolation and discomfort were clear to him. Yet, without specific examples, the audience was left to balance the claims against what could be independently verified. As the questioning continued, the tension built further. Harry attempted to articulate a pattern of treatment and media coverage that he believed reflected institutional bias, emphasizing his perspective while avoiding naming names. Stephanopoulos kept returning to the same point. Patterns alone could indicate issues, but the public needed concrete details to fully understand and evaluate the claims. Harry's composure wavered at times, his royal training battling with the frustration of defending deeply personal experiences without the evidence that the host required. For viewers, the segment highlighted a central tension in the interview: the difficulty of reconciling emotional truth with verifiable facts. Harry wanted to protect his family and defend his wife, but the lack of concrete proof created a gap between narrative and accountability. The struggle was visible, humanizing him while also reinforcing the stakes of the confrontation. By the end of the segment, it was clear that this challenge had pushed Harry to his limits, and the audience could sense that the hardest questions were yet to come. As the questions continued to press on accountability, Harry's composure began to falter. His face flushed red, and his hands gripped the arms of the chair so tightly that the knuckles turned white. The cameras captured every subtle shift in expression, every small tremor in his fingers, as the tension in the studio reached its peak. Stephanopoulos maintained a calm, professional demeanor, giving each pause just enough space to let the weight of the questions settle. For a moment there was silence. Harry stared down at the table, his jaw tight, his breathing measured but strained. The audience could feel the gravity of the confrontation. This was no longer about talking points or prepared responses. It was about raw human emotion, about facing scrutiny for decisions that had shaped his life and his family's future. The quiet moments amplified the intensity, forcing viewers to recognize the vulnerability behind the public image of a confident, composed prince. When Harry finally spoke, his voice was tight and slightly trembling. He admitted that he was exhausted, that defending every aspect of his narrative while protecting loved ones had taken a toll. Every carefully crafted story, every accusation, every explanation now felt heavier under the lens of scrutiny. The audience could sense the internal struggle between maintaining dignity, protecting his family, and answering questions that cut to the heart of his decisions. The strategic pauses and visible signs of frustration allowed the audience to engage more deeply. Viewers could see that this was more than an interview. It was a human moment, a rare glimpse of someone grappling with the consequences of their actions, the contradictions in their story, and the emotional burden of being a public figure under relentless scrutiny. The silence spoke as loudly as words, emphasizing the peak of tension in the confrontation. Stephanopoulos leaned in, his tone calm but unwavering, and asked the question that had been building throughout the interview. Did Harry ever take responsibility for the things that went wrong in his life, or was it always someone else's fault? The question hit like a spotlight on every choice, every statement, and every public claim he had made. For a moment, Harry looked stunned, his eyes darting slightly as he tried to find a foothold in the conversation. The host drew a clear contrast between Harry's heroic past choices, such as serving in Afghanistan and prioritizing family safety, and the everyday decisions that had created tension and controversy. Stephanopoulos pressed on, asking about the smaller, avoidable mistakes, moments of impulsive behavior, comments that had caused offense, and public actions that had complicated personal relationships. Each question was precise, measured, and impossible to deflect. Harry's jaw tightened, and his hands moved nervously as he leaned forward in the chair. He spoke in a voice tight with barely contained frustration, insisting that he had taken responsibility for his decisions, for his service, and for protecting his family. Yet the audience could sense the cracks. His composure was wavering, and the carefully cultivated confidence that had carried him through earlier interviews seemed to falter under the weight of the scrutiny. Stephanopoulos did not relent. He reminded Harry that responsibility was not only about heroic moments or major life events, but about the smaller choices, the everyday actions that shaped public perception and impacted the people around him. Each example he gave highlighted the tension between personal accountability and blaming others. Harry struggled to respond, his face flushed, his voice occasionally rising in emotion. The intensity in the studio was palpable. Every gesture, every pause, every defensive response amplified the emotional stakes. Viewers could feel the weight of the confrontation, as Harry faced questions that cut to the core of his narrative and forced him to examine the consequences of his own actions. This was the peak of the interview, where heroism, personal responsibility, and emotional vulnerability collided in a moment of raw human tension. Harry abruptly straightened in his chair, his voice rising as he declared that he would not continue the interview under these conditions. He stood up, the chair scraping against the studio floor, and said that he felt ambushed and unfairly attacked. Every eye in the studio turned toward him, the tension practically crackling in the air. This was a moment of raw emotion, a visible power play as a public figure attempted to reclaim control. Stephanopoulos remained seated, calm and composed, his tone steady but firm. He reminded Harry that there were still minutes left in the scheduled interview and that millions of viewers were watching to hear his perspective. The host emphasized that accountability was not optional, and walking away would only leave questions unanswered and reinforce doubts about consistency and responsibility. The standoff created a dramatic tension that viewers could feel through the screen. Harry's frustration was evident, his movements sharp, his expression a mix of anger and defensiveness. Stephanopoulos' steady insistence on continuing highlighted the classic struggle between celebrity and journalist, the desire for control versus the responsibility to face scrutiny. After a long pause, Harry slowly sank back into the chair, his shoulders slumping slightly as he conceded to stay, though clearly uneasy. The audience sensed the psychological tug-of-war, the delicate balance between authority and accountability. This moment served as a turning point, emphasizing that no matter the fame or title, the hard questions would not be avoided, and the confrontation had reached a new level of intensity. Harry finally slumped back in his chair, his hands resting on his knees, and let out a quiet, almost defeated sigh. The anger and defensiveness that had dominated the earlier minutes of the interview gave way to something more human, more raw. He admitted, in a voice that was soft but steady, that he did not have all the answers. He confessed that some decisions were complicated, some outcomes unintended, and some consequences heavier than he had anticipated. He acknowledged that he was still learning, still grappling with contradictions, and still trying to reconcile his desire to protect his family with the public scrutiny he had willingly embraced. Stephanopoulos listened closely, nodding subtly, and then framed this admission as a form of honesty that could be the first step toward real reflection. He noted that acknowledging uncertainty did not diminish responsibility. Instead, it opened the door for growth and healing. The tension in the studio softened slightly as Harry's vulnerability became clear, and viewers could sense that this moment marked a shift from confrontation to contemplation. The audience was left with a moral and emotional takeaway. Even public figures with titles, wealth, and fame are human, and accountability often begins with admitting the limits of one's own understanding. As the interview drew to a close, Stephanopoulos summarized the confrontation with clarity. He reminded viewers that the discussion had spanned accountability, truth, family loyalty, and the pressures of life under a global spotlight. He highlighted that the interview had exposed contradictions, challenged narratives, and pushed for honesty in a way few public discussions ever do. Then he turned to the audience, asking questions to spark engagement. Was Stephanopoulos too harsh in his approach? Should journalists always ask the tough questions, no matter someone's title or fame? Viewers were encouraged to join the conversation by leaving comments, sharing their perspectives, and hitting the like button if they found the discussion compelling. Stephanopoulos also reminded them to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth coverage of celebrity confrontations, explosive interviews, and the untold stories behind public figures. He teased upcoming content, hinting at similarly intense interviews that would explore conflicts, revelations, and moments when fame met accountability head-on. The camera lingered for a moment on Harry, whose expression now reflected exhaustion and introspection, before shifting to a wider shot of the studio. The confrontation had ended, but the questions, the emotions, and the lessons remained with the audience. For viewers, it was a rare glimpse behind the polished public persona of a royal, a moment of honesty that encouraged them to consider the complexities of accountability, privilege, and the cost of speaking out. The segment ended with the gentle reminder that while interviews can reveal truths, the responsibility to reflect, learn, and engage does not rest on the journalist alone. It is a conversation the public, the subject, and society all share.